Gary called me earlier this year, and we've been very good friends as governors together. His first term was my second, so we saw a lot of each other, and we were a mutual admiration society even at that time. But no sales pitch was required. I immediately saw that it would make a lot of sense, first of all because of the political year we're in, with that big void in the middle and with the other parties hating each other and stirring up negativity in the country, which I think is bad for the country, but also because we're both former two-term governors. It wouldn't really matter whether we were Republicans or Democrats, but we both changed the culture of our states, and nobody could say we didn't. So that's a lot more punch than you usually get on a third-party ticket. So we think, in a way, we're carrying the banner for the third-party idea, or for a breakup of the monopoly of the R's and the D's having a stranglehold on the electoral process. So I think this is the year when people can be persuaded that they have almost a bounden duty to think for themselves and make the choice based on who they think would be best for the country, as opposed to who has an R next to their name and who has a D next to their name.
I'm just in agreement with the premise that there are systemic issues, and those systemic issues, blacks being shot, it's six times more likelihood to be shot if you're black than if you're white. If you're arrested on drug-related crime and you are of color, 4 times more likelihood that you'll go to prison. Well, when you combine those, when you recognize that, you also recognize that they're being shook down. And so when they have these higher arrest rates than whites, if whites were subject to the same shakedown that color is subject to, whites would have that same arrest rate also. One of our big issues is we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. I refuse to believe that we are any less law-abiding than other countries, and I think its roots are in the drug war. We would really like to bring an end to the drug war. I've been very outspoken regarding legalizing marijuana. We have tens of millions of Americans who are convicted felons that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. So I think with regard to the Department of Justice and the fact that we would oversee that, that we could lend ourselves to this national, what needs to be an absolute national discussion on why this is happening and a recognition by everyone it's happening. I was on Fox 5 the other day with Eric Bolling, and I made these points, and I'm not faulting Eric because I think he speaks on behalf of a lot of people, but I said, he took issue with the fact that I said Black lives matter. He said all lives matter. I said all lives do matter, but the reason that Black lives matter is because of all those things that I just mentioned. And then he says, yeah, but blacks are being arrested at 8 times the rate. They're committing 8 times the crime. No, they're not. If we were subject to that same, we, whites, my head in the sand, we've all had our heads in the sand, me being first. I've had my head in the sand over this issue. And of late, I'd like to think I've become a little bit more informed.
And when the Trumps of the world say all lives matter, that's code to their followers. We're really not going to engage on this question. So I think the correct answer to the question, do Black lives matter, is not all lives matter. It is yes. And as you put it, we have a national emergency in this country, which is the status of particularly young black males under the age of 30 who have these incarceration rates and at risk of being shot, and they also have black male teenage unemployment is 65%, something like that. It's a national emergency, and I think the roots go to education and employment. It's not strictly a color issue. If blacks weren't victimized by being trapped in underperforming inner city schools, for example, it would be a big help. So that's one reason why Governor Johnson and I are big proponents of charter schools and school choice, so that parents can get their kids out of underperforming schools and do better. The idea, and you may recall, in this state we put in high stakes tests in 4th, 8th, and the 10th grade when Paul Cellucci and I were in office, and About 3 years after that, the test started to kick in. Massachusetts has been #1 in reading and math at the 12th grade level every year since then. So, we got rid of social promotions. Social promotions were when a kid would get to be a senior in high school, and even if it had been a terrible performing school and his or her reading and math competencies were not up to snuff, it was off you go to college, you're out of here, purely social promotion, not doing that kid any favors whatsoever. So the education area needs a lot of emphasis. The employment area needs a lot of emphasis as well. And there are things government can do to increase the supply of jobs and to try to help particular segments of the population, whether it's workers displaced by trade or, as I say, we have a national issue with young black males. And I say that both as a prudential matter, we're going to wind up with a gunpowder class if we don't address this, and as a moral matter, it's a stain upon the country.
Well, in the 2012 cycle, Rick Perry was beating his chest over the fact that he had the best record when it came to jobs of all the candidates running. Well, they did an analysis, and lo and behold, it was Johnson that had the best record on jobs. And my response to that was the same response I gave as governor. Look, I didn't create a single job as governor. The private sector creates jobs, not the government. But I think what I created in New Mexico, and I think what Bill Weld did here in Massachusetts, and I think what we will do as president and vice president is to absolutely establish certainty in policy. And certainty in policy when it comes to the economy is, look, rules and regulations from a common sense standpoint are going to get better. They're not going to get worse. Are they going to improve? Well, yes, they will improve because we'll be running the administration and from a rules and regulations standpoint, better. From a tax standpoint, we're not getting elected king, we're not getting elected dictator, we're getting elected president, vice president, so there are constitutional limits to that, and that is we either get to agree or disagree with what comes out of Congress. Count on us to support any lowering of taxes. Count on us to oppose, veto, any tax increase. Neither of us having raised taxes a penny over either of our terms. But if I could wave a magic wand, and what I would like to promote is abolishing income tax, abolishing corporate tax, replacing it with one federal consumption tax. I put the fair tax out there as a template for how you could accomplish one federal consumption tax, believing that with zero corporate tax, and you and I pay for corporate tax. I mean, we pay for it. You might not want to, a lot of people might not want to admit that, but we pay for corporate tax. If we had zero corporate tax in this country, in my opinion, tens of millions of jobs would get created for no other reason than zero corporate tax. And I also believe that 80% of Washington lobbyists would get issued pink slips because that is why they're there, is to garner tax favor. I mean, that's what crony capitalism is all about. Zero corporate tax, I think, kicks crony capitalism a big one.
Having said all that, I mean, there's a lot we could do as an administration. I mean, I don't think I know that when taxes are in a one-way ratchet down, that businesses, particularly small and medium-sized businesses, who watch the margins very closely, will have the confidence to build that plant, to hire those 9 more workers, and 80% of the job growth comes from small and medium-sized businesses. And they don't need huge tax cuts, they just need what Gary said. They need certainty and confidence that there's not going to be tax increases that will throw off their budget and their planning. People say, what's your top priority when you get to Washington? Our top priority is going to be balancing the budget and sending in a balanced budget in the first 100 days. Not in 5 years, not in 7 years, not in 9 years, which is how long people in Washington say it's going to take to balance the budget. And I know this could be done because when we came into office, we had a 14% deficit staring us in the face. And I came into office January 3, my budget was due February 28th, So I had to find, these numbers are small by federal standards, but I had to find $2 billion to close the loophole in a $14 billion budget, which is a 14% ask. We did it in a matter of weeks, because both Gary and I, when we were elected governor, it was our first elective office. Big advantage. You don't know about all the sacred cows in the state budget. You don't even know that they're cows, much less that they're sacred. So you can zero base everything and assume that everything is going to start at zero. And if it's a wonderful public health program based on preventive medicine that has wonderful outcomes, maybe you multiply that appropriation by 9. And another appropriation, probably a bigger one, that creates a vast bureaucracy that nobody can quite explain to us what it does, but it's been around a long time and we've always done it that way. Zero. So that's how you balance a budget. You have to, it's purely a matter of political will. Again, this is not something I think, this is something I'm very sure of. So that would be our top priority. Goes immediately to your issue, because when you cut taxes, when you cut spending and obvious overspending, when you turn around the vector of the national debt, then that creates confidence, employment goes up. When I came in, Massachusetts had by far the highest unemployment rate of any of the 11 industrial states. At the end of my first term, it had the lowest. That was not an accident.
SAPs divide, and in that context, the pitch is 2 for the price of 1.
This is the Weld-Salucci model, except that this time I'm number 2 instead of number 1.
First of all, we're going to honor all treaties and obligations going into the office. I think that that's absolutely tantamount to going into the office. I'd like to make the same pitch that I just made, that there will be a certainty that we're not going to entangle ourselves in relationships that are going to make things worse and not better. I think that when we involve ourselves in regime change, Iraq, Syria, Libya, that the consequences have been worse, not better. When we're the world's policeman, as opposed to attacking when attacked, the reason for having a military. Almost 3 weeks ago, there was a poll among active military members on who they favored to be president of the United States. I won that poll. And I think what that says in spades is that here's a couple of guys that are going to use the military judiciously. That when they use the military, it's going to be for reason. And that reason is to defend ourselves. That said, there's a couple of things that are happening right now that are really huge. One is the civil war in Syria and how we deal with that. We really need to join hands with Russia diplomatically to bring an end to that. And it's very complex. But it's made complex because we intervened to establish regime change. And when we did that, and this was not intentional, but Hillary and Obama went in and supported the opposition in both Syria and Libya. The opposition was aligned with ISIS. Not directly, but they were aligned with ISIS against the leadership supporting regime change. Well, the opposition gets beat in both countries, and all those arms end up in ISIS hands. And this is the unintended consequence. Not intentional on Clinton's or Obama's part, but this is what happened. Also, I think that the biggest threat in the world right now is North Korea, and the fact that at some point these intercontinental ballistic missiles are going to work. The solution to Korea is joining hands with China to deal with this diplomatically, because they also recognize this. We got 40,000 troops in South Korea. There is no chance that North Korea invades South Korea conventionally. It's not going to happen. It can't happen. And yet, if they launch nuclear weapons, we have them covered with our nuclear umbrella, but take a breath. That's the biggest threat that exists in the world today, because that has potential of actually happening. So, anyway, there it is. Oh gosh, maybe if you go back 2 months now, that it was reported that we appeared at 10% in a poll. This was 2 months ago. So there's this notion that somehow or among some anyway, that we flattened here, and how are we going to ever get to 15%? Well, the consensus number when we appeared at 10%, the consensus number was really 5%. Consensus number. Right now, the consensus number is 10. And if you start looking at polls in 5 states now, we're at 16%, and we're starting to show up in polls. So we're doubling like every 3 weeks right now. From a social media standpoint, we're reaching 30 million people. But that's a doubling in the last 3 weeks. It's amazing. We did a rally in Vermont the other night where the crowd was like 400 people, right? And the guy who gets up to talk, first person to talk, he said, "This is the biggest crowd that I've ever addressed." Well, 3 hours later on Facebook Live, 300,000 people viewed that rally. So there is a bunch of attention right now being drawn to us. We just launched into a $1 million plus awareness in 10 states yesterday that we're going up on. So we feel confident we're going to actually get to the 15%, recognizing this every 3-week thing doubling.
We're on the ballot in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. You know, we're a recognized party. If they say, well, we're going to pick and choose among parties, and we're going to say if you're an R or a D, that's okay, you get to be in the debates, but not if you're an L. Well, there goes that tax exemption, and I would think the Commission might take that into consideration as to the form of organization that they are. Lastly, there's a role here to be played by public opinion. There was a poll taken 2 days ago, Quinnipiac, that showed that 62% of the people in the United States, everybody, think that we should be in the debates. Now, Abraham Lincoln, your lineal forebear in politics, said once upon a time that without public opinion, nothing is possible, and with it, anything is possible. If I was a member of that commission, I wouldn't particularly want to be tarred and feathered and ridden out of town on a rail for saying, no, we're going to have only R's and D's, because they've done such a good job in Washington the last 15 years. Say to that 55 or 60% of the American public, you know, you agree with us. You're socially inclusive. You're not like Donald Trump, you know, hurling epithets and pitting group against group and trying to stir up fear and, frankly, hatred among groups, taking the country in the opposite direction from where it should go. And we are fiscally responsible. We're not like the Democrats promising that everything is going to be free. Those of you who are here when I was governor may remember one of my slogans was, there's no such thing as government money, there's only taxpayers' money. We're both very cognizant of that fact and govern in that vein. So if people listen to that, I think that's playing a winning hand in poker. And I don't know what the other guys say on the debate stage to negate that, because it's so obviously true. And they cannot argue that we didn't change our states, because that's settled. And we're not offering a promise or a conjecture or a hope. We're offering history.
Johnson Weld are elected, big 6-lane highway down the middle, fiscally conservative, socially inclusive, skeptical of military interventions, reflective of 60% of the population, having a bipartisan administration, hiring Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, everybody Libertarian leaning. I think you can make a case that that third scenario has a chance of actually succeeding.
Both parties seem to want to kill the other party. That's what they want to do when they wake up in the morning, and that means that anything that comes from the White House, if it's an R or a D, the other party is going to pronounce it dead on arrival. But they'd have no incentive to do that with ours, because it would have come out of an administration 50% from people that they'd played with in the sandbox for a long time.